Kia ora. I'm Warren Warbrick. I'm a Rangitane from New Zealand, Aotearoa, and I have many interests in the area of traditional practice, but in this instance we are talking about the idea of our toki. Although we're here doing a kind of a what would you call it? A physical study of Samoan adze making, as well as how they're lashed and other things that go along with that. But what I have with me is our Maori version of this. So we have the toki, although we call this a kakau, and in tradition it relates to the time of our beginnings, or our story of our creation myth. So it's really looking at how Ranginui and Papatūānuku were separated. So Papatūānuku is the whenua, or the earth, Ranginui is the sky. These two were in an eternal embrace. Between them there were a number of children, and these children decided that they would separate the two parents so that they could bring spiritual growth into their realm and have space to grow. Now Tāne, one of the older siblings, Tangoroa, Tūmā Tauenga and Haumie and a number of others, had a discussion on how they were going to do this. Some of the siblings were wanting this to happen, and there's a number of them that didn't. But in the end, the decision was for this to happen. Tāne, I'm going to do this in short, this is a very long story, but Tāne decided that he would separate them, and during the separation it was not easy. Every time they did it, the parents would pull themselves back together. So one of the siblings gave up parts of his tinana, or his body. One was his leg, so the kakau becomes the leg of that ancestor or atua who had kohad part of his body for that. Another was the stone, came from another atua, and then another was the fibre, and the fibre is really important. So what this developed was the adze, and the adze would be attached to the kakau. Now what we have is two, just moving away from the narrative a bit, we have two elements that relate to the male side of things, and as you can see, you can't really do too much with them without the female element, and this is the female element here. So this one here, this is the muka, and this muka has been taken from the flax plant, or what we refer to as the harakeke. We have masses of harakeke, especially in our area where we're from, in Manawatu. When you strip the green parts of the leaf of the harakeke, or the rau of the harakeke, or the leaf, you get these fibres here. And these fibres are very, very strong. Today our weavers refer to these as the super fibre. And this comes from a particular plant that is governed by an ancestress or a female atua by the name of Hene Te Iwa Iwa. And these are really important. because at the end of the day, without the female element, you cannot bind together these two. And in life, that's a strong balance between what we refer to as the female element as being noa, and the male element being tapu. And when these are bound together, they become really strong. So this particular adze that was made during the time of the separation of Rangi and Papa, it was used to sever the limbs of Papa, Tuanuku and Ranginui. And because of this this act that was done by Tāne's brother, Tūmatauenga, we have the adze, and the first use of the adze, and what we call toki. The toki became a major part of our culture in terms of a tool that we make almost everything with, but also the toki has become, because of the use of it during the time of the separation of Rangi and Papa, it's also become a very strong representation of the whakapapa of our people, and the genealogies, and it is expressed through a toki that we refer to as the toki pautangata. And the toki pautangata is an adze that is carried by our chiefly men of high rank, and it's a symbol of his mana over the people. As you can see, when we bind it through, it starts to hold the blade in place. Our adzes are quite different to what they once were. I'm not sure of the origin of Samoan adzes, but I'm sure they have an equally as interesting kind of history. So this is what they look like when they're bound up. There's one other element to adzes that are really important in terms of Maori adzes. Our fibre, what we refer to as moka, when it's plaited, it forms a really strong, what we call tauda or rope. It's massively strong. But the difference between this and senet, which this whole whale is bound together with, is that senet has actually got an elasticity to it. So when you bind it on, it holds itself on really, really well and for a really long time. So there's no need for having water attached to it. But with ours, you bind it on, it becomes quite strong, and then you place it into water, everything will expand, and the binding will expand. Everything on this will become insanely tight. This would last for up to a day and a half. In here we have a piece of leather that runs through it. Traditionally we use a bark, and the bark will run from here underneath the blade, over the top, and then out this way. And then you bind this section first, as you saw me do, and then you fold this part over, and then you bind back through, and then down the handle. And what this does is, one, it protects all of the fibres at the top here, so that when you're using it, and so at times it may hit the timber, so it protects it here. The other is that it forms a socket, and when this is done in bark, it forms it really well. So if I'm using this tool and the whole edge becomes damaged and it needs sharpening, I put it out in the sun and it will start to dry it out. All of this binding will then become very loose. Not super loose, but loose. And then you can pull the blade out, you go and sharpen that, place the blade back in, make sure it's all nice and snug again, put it in the water, only needs to be less than a minute, and it's all ready to go again. So it's got, the whole technique is over many generations has evolved from our early types of adzes to this one, or this type. Even the handle is very different to what our Samoan cousins do. Although we still have this foot area and also this protrusion at the back, but it's just not as long as it once was. We used to have the cut-in foot, as Samoan ones do, but we stopped using that and created this concept, which over time became more efficient in terms of how we work it within the environment of old, in terms of the Maori environment. Very different to here. One is really warm and it's very humid, and which has been interesting in terms of how it affects my tools, because I find my binding will stay nice and tight for a very long time. It doesn't dry out as quick, if you like.
Can you talk about the one made from a file?
So when Europeans arrived, we had a number of developments that had happened. One, especially with the whalers, when they arrived, we were introduced to things such as nails. Our people, as Maori, were very into the idea of the new technologies that were brought to us. Although today we think of them as being very mundane, but at the time a piece of steel was extremely valuable. So back in the early times, about 1830s and earlier, when the whalers were coming into our shores, they would bring ship's nails, and our people would trade heavily for them. And if they weren't trading for them, they were sneakily taking them out of the ship. And the other thing we traded for were the German jack planes, which are big wooden planes, but they had blades on them as wide as this. They weren't as thick as this, although they were thick at one end where the bevel was, and then they go quite thin. But they were perfect for making adzes, and they were very strong. The other thing that we found was with these, and I still use these today. This is an old file. This one is, this is a very old one. I find the modern files are not very good. The metal isn't the same. I always look for a file that has a lot of age to it, so heavily rusted. But the steel in the very old ones are extremely hard, and they work very well as an adze, and sometimes as a file, or turning it into a type of chisel. But they're very versatile. They hold a really nice weight. This is a rather small one, but with a blade this size you can do quite a lot of work very efficiently. I quite like using the adze. I can see why the old people had developed them throughout Polynesia. You don't need anything to clamp your timbers with. You don't need a workbench. You can sit on the floor and carve to your heart's content, and very quick.
Can you talk about the grinding stone and the stories behind the grinding stones?
The grinding stones are really interesting, and this particular one is in relation to pounamu. So these blades here are called pounamu, or the material. We find this on the west coast of the South Island, and both these stones are, although they look slightly different, but they're actually the same type of stone, and these are called kawakawa, the type of pounamu. And it's because it's got a deep green in it with a lot of black flecks through it. I try and get a stone that's got less black flecks, but it's believed that back in our homeland of Hawaii, there was a man by the name of Potini, or a being by the name of Potini. He was married to a woman called Hene Tuhuanga, and there are many variations of this particular narrative, but this is just very one simple version of it. So Hene Tuhuanga and Potini were married. They didn't really get on that well, and they kind of had a very abrasive kind of relationship. So Potini decided he was going to take off and find a better place to live, which was away from her. So Potini turned himself into a fish, and he swam to Aotearoa, and he went up the rivers in the South Island, and he hid there. His wife, Hene Tuhuanga, she's the sandstone. And as sandstone, what she did was she made herself come apart and become the granules of sand, and then allowed the ocean to carry her, to follow her. And then when she came to the shores of Aotearoa, especially on the west coast, she came together again as a stone, but she ended up being stuck there. She couldn't follow him or go and find him. So she needed an element to do that. So our people, when we wish to make adzes or sharpen adzes, we need to find the hoanga, or the sandstone, which is Hene Tuhuanga, and we bring these two together. Again, like the lashing, you've got to have water. Everything has to have water with it. So you have Hene Tuhuanga, you have her halfway into the water and halfway out, and then you have the tool, and you drag the water up, because the water is really the one thing that binds these two together. But also they continue their argument, so as you're grinding the stone and shaping it, you're having their argument happen. Now, out of most arguments you have two negative forces, but these two negative forces should have a positive result. That positive result is the item that has been created. And so we have adzes, we have toki, whao, we have pendants, we have all kinds of things that are made when these two come together, and then you separate them again for the next time, and they need to come together again. But the South Island people, I'm from the North Island, so our narrative is that is one of our narratives, but there's other narratives, especially down the south of the South Island, especially along the west coast. The west coast have the strongest narratives of Potini and Hene Tuhuanga. But I can only tell my people's.